let me tell you a little about Duolingo. So I started Duolingo with my co-founder about 6 or so years ago. I was in a very fortunate position. I had just sold my second company to Google, which is these distorted characters that you have to type all over the internet, called CAPTCHA, those distorted things that you have to type. They're very annoying. I helped invent, basically I invented that, so sorry. So I was in a pretty fortunate position, and I wanted to do a company that would be, or a project, it was a project that would be related to something that was my passion, which is education. It's always been my passion. But my views on education are very related to where I'm from. I am from Guatemala. This is a public service announcement. That is where Guatemala is. Right there. That is not where they keep the prisoners. That is called Guatemala. Now, if you don't know, Guatemala is a very poor country. And a lot of people talk about education as something that can bring equality to different social classes, but I always saw it as the opposite, as something that brings inequality. Because what happens is that people who have a lot of money can buy themselves the best education in the world, and because of that they continue having a lot of money, whereas people who don't have very much money barely learn how to read and write, and because of that they never make a lot of money. So this is kind of how I saw it. So what I wanted to do was something that would give equal access to education to everybody. Now, education is very general, so what I decided to do was to do something that was, just one aspect of education, which is learning a foreign language, which happens to be really huge everywhere in the world, except in the United States. It's not that big. But there's about 1.2 billion people in the world learning a foreign language. Now, this is a very interesting market. So, the majority of these people, 800 million of them, satisfy 3 properties. First, they're learning English. Second, the reason they're learning English is to get a job or a better job. And third, they are of low socioeconomic conditions. Okay, so most people learning a foreign language are basically learning English in order to get out of poverty. But before we started Duolingo, most of the ways there were to learn a foreign language were very expensive. So for example, there was this thing called Rosetta Stone. It was about $1,000 at the time. So the irony of it is most people were trying to learn a language to get out of poverty, but somehow you needed $1,000 in order to get out of poverty. So it didn't make any sense. So what we decided to do was to launch this thing. At first it was a website, Duolingo.com, but then it also became an app. We launched it about 6 years ago, and the promise of it was we will always let you fully learn a language. All of the language learning content that we're going to give it away for free. And so that has been the promise, and we launched it, and we were very lucky. Since we launched it, it has become the most popular way to learn languages in the world. It now has, there's a lot of really impressive numbers. So for example, there are more people learning languages on Duolingo in the United States than there are people learning languages in the whole US public school system. We have, when we teach a lot of languages, we teach English obviously, but we also teach Spanish, German, French, and all the big ones. And we also teach some smaller languages. For example, we teach Klingon. Yes. We teach High Valyrian. Game of Thrones is starting pretty soon, so we teach High Valyrian. We also teach Irish. I'll be honest, I did not know that Irish was a language until I started working on Duolingo. I thought they all spoke English in Ireland, which they do, but there are some people whose native language is Irish. In fact, there are 94,000 people whose native language is Irish. And what's amazing about Duolingo, we have so many users that ever since we added Irish to Duolingo, there are about 1 million people learning Irish actively on Duolingo ever since then. So we actually have a chance of multiplying the number of Irish speakers by 10 by just learning this language on here. And it is because of this that actually the Irish president gave us an award, a big award, because we're helping the Irish language. And we went to get it. And if you've never seen a picture of the Irish president, I recommend you look him up. He looks amazing. Actually, I have one here. It is the guy in the middle. That is he really looks like he should be the Irish president. The other people are people that work for Duolingo. Now, here's some of the things that people have said about why Duolingo has become very popular. Here's some of the things that people have said. This person said in the past 2 days they've learned more from Duolingo than in 4 years of high school. Now, Duolingo's good, but it's not that good. So I think that says more about high school than about Duolingo. There was this other person right here. That is my mother. thing about Duolingo is, and you know, the real reason why Duolingo has become so popular is because early on when we were working on it, we realized that one of the hardest things about learning a language by yourself, probably the hardest thing about learning a language by yourself, was keeping yourself motivated. So not just a language, learning anything by yourself, the hardest thing is keeping yourself motivated. So what we decided to do was we decided to make Duolingo feel as much like a game as possible. So for example, this is what the home screen of the Duolingo app looks like. It looks kind of like a game. The way we teach the language is we actually split up the language into multiple units that we call skills. So for example, one of them is animals. That's where we teach you all the names of animals. Another one's called food. That's where we teach you how to order food at a restaurant, etc. And the idea is at the very beginning, only one skill is unlocked, and then you have to complete that skill to unlock the next row of skills. Then when you complete that row, you unlock the next row, etc. And so there's this gamified unlocking mechanism that keeps people pretty interested in doing Duolingo. And then inside each one of the skills, the way you complete it is you take these little lessons that take about 3 to 4 minutes, and in each lesson you basically have to solve little exercises. We have found that basically having people just read stuff is no good. They basically go away if we make them read a bunch of grammar. So instead, the way we teach is very active. Basically at all times you're having to solve little problems. We may have to get you to listen to something, and you have to pick from a bunch of words in a word bank, or you may have to pick the right image that corresponds to the word, or you may have to speak to the app and it tells you whether you said it correctly or not. And at any point you're getting every exercise either right or wrong. And at the beginning of a lesson, there's this progress bar at the top. At the beginning of a lesson, the progress bar is empty. And whenever you get an exercise right, the progress bar fills up a little bit. Whenever you get an exercise wrong, the progress bar goes down. And the whole goal is to fill up that progress bar, and that's how you finish a lesson. Now, that's the idea of Duolingo. There's a lot of sophistication in the background that people don't realize. Whenever you start a lesson on Duolingo, our system actually takes into account everything that you've ever done so far on Duolingo to build a lesson that is just for you. That we basically take into account, all the times that you got an exercise right, or all the times that you got an exercise wrong. The times that you took too long to answer something, we use that as a signal that maybe that's a little hard for you. And we do take all of this into account, and then we build a lesson that is supposed to optimize two things. One is to teach you better, and the other one is to keep you as addicted as possible. This actually really helps. We give you a bunch of exercises. And by the way, for every exercise that we give you, we kind of know whether you're going to get it right or wrong. We have a pretty good idea. And there are many times where we actually give you an exercise just so that you get it wrong. Because it's no fun if you get everything right. So we give you exercises, and whenever you get an exercise that we think is too hard for you and you get it wrong, that progress bar actually doesn't go down very much because we kind of already expected you to get it wrong. But if you get that right, if you break our expectation, the progress bar actually goes up quite a bit because you broke our expectation. So we do a lot of sophisticated stuff like that. When we launched Duolingo, this was maybe about, when we launched, I actually didn't know anything about how to teach languages. I learned English at a very early age. My native language is Spanish, but I learned English at a very early age, so I don't actually remember having learned English. The same is true of my co-founder. And then the only other thing that I knew about learning languages is when I was in high school, I took a French class because I had a crush on a girl, and I failed in both, in the French class and the girl. But that's it. That's all I knew about how to teach languages. So, we wanted to make a language learning app, and neither I nor my co-founder, I was a professor in computer science, he was my PhD student. We knew nothing about how to teach languages. So what we decided to do was to go read a bunch of books about how to best teach languages. So for example, we read French for Dummies. We read a bunch of books. And we were, of course, engineers trying to figure out how to best teach a language. We had very simple questions, very pragmatic questions. Like, for example, we wanted to know, should you teach plurals before adjectives? And that's the type of question we had. And for some of those questions, the books had answers to them. But for some other questions, there didn't seem to be a lot of agreement about how to best teach. So what we did is we launched something that we thought was, we kind of read a bunch of books and we launched something that we thought was reasonable. But then we were lucky that we started getting a lot of users, and we realized that we had enough users to actually start answering all the questions that we originally had with our own users. So For example, nowadays, if we want to know whether we should teach plurals before adjectives or adjectives before plurals, we just run an experiment with our users. So for example, for the next 50,000 people that sign up, which on Duolingo it takes about 6 hours to get 50,000 new users. So for the next 50,000 people that sign up, to half of them we teach them plurals before adjectives, to the other half we teach them adjectives before plurals, and then we check which ones learn better, or which ones stick around for longer, or whatever. And then once and for all, we can figure out that at least for our users, for that particular language, it is better this way versus the other way. And so every day, Duolingo is just getting better. On a given week, we're probably running about 100 of these different experiments that are just slightly tweaking to try to figure out how to best teach you the language. So if you use Duolingo today, it's probably better than it was 6 months ago, and better than it was a year ago, etc. It just always keeps getting better and better. And because of that, somebody did an external university did a study, and they found that if you use Duolingo for 34 hours, you learn the equivalent of 1 semester of a university course, which usually takes a lot longer than 34 hours. So that's pretty cool. This is another thing. This is probably the last thing that I'm gonna tell you about. This is the world. That's about it. So this is the map of the world. This is
flat.
It is flat. Check it out. Here's the thing about this particular map. This is a map. Somehow it's getting cut off. This is a map of the most commonly learned language in every country in the world on Duolingo. We have users in every single country in the world. This is a map, so you can't quite see what the colors belong to, but that pinkish color is English. So everywhere in the world, the most commonly learned language is English. In the United States, it's Spanish. In Canada, it's French. And you can see a lot of them. There's one that's very strange here, and it is Sweden. That actually happens to be Swedish. The most popularly learned language on Duolingo in Sweden is Swedish. When I first saw this, I saw this map. I mean, we have a data science team. They showed me this map. I immediately went to Sweden, and I'm like, guys, that's wrong. Because who would think that? Turns out, it is true. The most popularly learned language on Duolingo in Sweden is Swedish. But what's really interesting is, I was like, okay, well, we should go and look into that. Why is that the case? Turns out on Duolingo, we actually know people's native language. Turns out that these people, their native language is actually Arabic. So in Sweden, first of all, in Sweden, for some reason, everybody knows English, so nobody's learning English. And what's happening is a lot of the usage of Duolingo in Sweden is by refugees who don't know the language, and they're using Duolingo to, get better at it. So we feel pretty good, and then we actually started seeing, and in fact, in most of Europe, even though the most commonly learned language in most of Europe is English, usually the second most commonly learned language is the language of the country itself. So in Germany, it's German, etc. And it's usually from immigrants or refugees. So, and this is also true in the United States. In the United States, the second most commonly learned language on Duolingo is English. So this is happening a lot. The wall notwithstanding, this is what's going to happen. And that is actually all I wanted to tell you about Duolingo. So that's it. Thank you very much.